everything that I do, I feel, is autobiographical in some way. You know, it's I interact with the world and I bring it back inside myself and then regurgitate it in a form that I feel expresses who I am and how I am in the world. And that's, I think, the basis of this whole experience with autobiographical photography. We all have these family albums, right? I'm going back to this again. I mean, how many of you have gone home to find that it's not there anymore, and then had to figure out a way to get get yourself back to the past or back to the present by going back home and re-experiencing what was there. I mean, the old hardware store that my parents had turned into a flower shop well after, you know, my family was through. But I would go back, you know, and I'd go and look at the floor because the tiles were the same. You know, I wanted to see those tiles. You can still smell it. You could see that one little shelf was still there that they recycled and used again. It's really difficult to leave our past behind. And in my work, I'm looking at that all the time and looking at my past and my present. I went home I have to go home a lot because my mother is still there. And I realize when I'm there that I'm looking at the world as though it was 1970 or 1965, you know, and it isn't there. So I tried to go into the places that I used to haunt and photograph it to find out what was still there for me. This is a hotel restaurant, which this is a manipulated photograph. You know, I just played around with it on the computer. And shortly after I took that photo and a couple of others, I kind of wandered around the hotel. It burnt down. And so it was, you know, done. It was gone. And there's no other photo. I have a few of them, you know, and that really got me into thinking, well, maybe I should photograph some more things. So I went back and said to the people, you know, like the theater owner, you know, can I take a photograph in here because, you know, in case it burns down? And they were all, yeah, you can do that. So they let me in because the fire had just happened a couple of weeks prior. So everyone let me in. And so I tried to find the theater here that was the theater I experienced as a kid. And in fact, it's exactly the same, a little bit worse for wear. Straight photography. I also photographed a lot of the activities in the town, and I ended up doing paintings of some of the people. I know many of these people, and these were women that were my mother's friends and friends of mine from over time. Also, this whole experience of going back went further than the neighbors and the events that were happening in the present. I felt a need to go back further. And as a result, I ended up doing a series of paintings about my father's pioneer life, my relatives. I called it my Dead Relative series. And those things were not part of my life at all, but I still felt connected, really, to these women. You know, the great-grandmother and the aunts, the great aunts. I spent a lot of time with that series, working with that series. The photographs became very important to me. This photo that I'd seen my whole life, I eventually was able to name everyone. And I'm sure that some of you have gone through that experience of getting out the really old photos and doing your genealogy in some way. And my way of doing it wasn't to make the tree, but to paint the women, paint the children, and see, you know, who they were through working on them. And with autobiographical and mixed media, it's the same idea. You kind of just work with it and take a look. I needed the time to draw myself into the image more personally. Find out what it was I was feeling by the colors I chose to work with it or how I chose to work with that image. Then I wandered over to my mother's side of the family eventually. I went through her albums and I saw her friends and her life. She had moved to Vegreville from Montreal. It was all about jazz dancing and partying and lots of young soldiers and such. And she ended out in Vegreville, you know, where she cried for 3 days. And that part of her history, she always wanted to go back and visit. Her family was there. I went back with her a few times. And I felt very connected to that place that wasn't Vegreville, that wasn't the pioneers and the heavy, hard-working attitude that went with that. It was like a fantasy to me, I think. And I did really want to leave as a kid. You know, the railroad tracks became very, you know, it was like, if you travel east, you'll end up in Montreal, you know. There must be someplace else. This is typical, I think, for everyone of wanting to, you know, move on and do their own thing, get out of the past. My mother did stay there, grew old. She's still there, but she's developed dementia. So I'm finding that's brought a whole other angle to what I'm working with. I have to do everything through my work, right? I can't actually just feel it. You have to go through the work. That's the way it is sometimes. So I started a new series called Transitions. The old town, the old cars, the old, you know, Greek Orthodox, Ukrainian Greek Orthodox church in the background, just the past. Nothing changes and it's all different. The old railway bridge. I got into the idea of the railroad. This is manipulated in-camera, overexposed. And it's more how I feel about that bridge. That's how I see the bridge. I started photographing trains, and this one actually is a video of a train that I later on the computer just stopped. I made a still, right? I froze frame and ended up with these images of something passing through with maybe the stillness of the trees and background. But the main thing is moving through. I did a few paintings from that. So it's the same idea, catching. And while I was painting, I was thinking about my mother. I was thinking about her mind and how ideas are coming and going and not connecting and connecting. And I can see that in my own self, you know, how you go one way and then and you just let it go. You go somewhere else. I very much got into the idea of connections. I sense the passing. I've written here for you. I sense the passing of light through time, mind, and memory passing. Catching hold, letting go. On the computer, these stills were quite small, but on the computer I stretched them out and manipulated them and printed them out and used them to make mixed media work and the paintings. I was thinking about synapses, letting go, hanging on. You can do a lot on your computer now. We have the digital cameras and we've got a lot of photographs, and if you sense something coming out of your photo that you want to work with, you can drag that out and ignore the rest, and you can start to play in Photoshop with changing the meaning for you to make it more of what it, probably more so to explore what it is about that image that intrigues you. You can take your time with it and look at it. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you are trying to do and what you want to do in your work. A little more. Do you have any desire to take something out of your album, say, and photocopy it, take a better look at it, blow it up a bit, do a little work? Have any of you taken any art at all? Or maybe it's about getting together a kind of an album where you bring the past into the album and then bring in a bit more of the present to see where you're at with all of that now. Have you gone home to photograph where you came from, or to catch those people before they pass on? You know, that's the sort of thing that autobiographical photography ends up being on the simplest level. Because what I find is that everything becomes autobiographical when I start to bring it in from the outside.